So I dug out the holes in the smaller lures, and my target weight was 30.5 grams per side, and they're roughly that. But I noticed in my previous videos that I didn't show the putting of the lead in very well. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to just show you how to do that. What I do is I try to overfill. I use a nice big bowl so stuff can run off. So there it is, it's way too much lead. So what I then do is I start to pack it, and I roll it left to right, trying to get off any excess that seems to be hiding there. And there's a point where it kind of compacts, and you can tell that that's probably the place you want to weigh it at. And this one's not too bad. That's sitting at 26 grams, and I'm gonna stay there because, as you saw in the previous videos, this is on the margin of just floating. So I have stainless steel to add in here as well. So I think once I add the stainless steel, I think this will come up the right weight. The next step is going to be putting in some stainless steel through wires and belly loops. And one thing I did notice is that if I take this tape off, if I was to pour lead, I'm going to make a new lead hole here. Obviously this lead hole is way out of whack. I'll just fill that in. I'm going to make a new lead hole here, and I got to be careful the lead doesn't flow down this channel. So I'm going to put in a bit of wood filler there to stop it. You only have to stop it for a few seconds until it hardens, but the last thing you want is maybe lead to flow all the way out to the tip here, and it's going to really mess with your balance and could go this way as well. So normally on the bigger hooks I don't have to worry about that. The stainless steel typically on the larger lures cools the lead, but this is the size I'll be using for this lure, and it might have enough room there for the lead to go down a little way. So I'm just going to make sure that that doesn't happen. So anyway, next time you see me, I'll be making some through wires. So we're getting ready to put the stainless steel through wire in. This is kind of how it fits, and if you look inside of it, it fits in that channel that I made back during the woodworking section. So now our task is to make this front loop. Now this piece of wire is not very straight because it comes off a roll, and stainless steel is pretty springy. It's very hard to make straight. It doesn't necessarily have to be straight, but let's get on with making that loop. So I use a pair of wire pliers. You can see they're round on the end. And what I do, depending on how big the loop I want, I bend back, and then I bring it all the way around. Now this stuff is really quite strong, so it's kind of springy. So then I use the wire pliers to tell me how big that loop is, and it's always bigger than I want. So then I use the vise to kind of crimp it down a little bit. Again, I tested, so we're about halfway up. That's good. Now we can bend this thing back up again, and you can probably tell that this thing is kind of twisted and it's not really round, but we have a little bit of work to do with it. So I use a good pair of pliers, and I bend this back flat. Now that is starting to look a little bit better. And then I do something called a wraparound. Now this is something I do just so the end will never unwrap. And this will be hidden inside the lure. Then you got 2 or 3 or 4 wraps, it doesn't matter. You may have to dig out a little bit of wood to fit it. And then I've got this great pair of German snippers. And the reason I like these snippers is they get right in there and they can snip that off. So this is what the loop looks like. Doesn't look particularly round, but I have a little tool here that I'm going to show you, and it's going to help me round this guy out. So this is a cone, fits in the vise here. It's from a piece of Milwaukee equipment for joining pipes. I'm sure you might have trouble getting one of these, but it's if you can get one, they're just great. So what you do is you put the loop on top here of the cone, and you can see right off the bat that the loop is not tight to the cone. So then I use a, this happens to be a 15/16 long socket, and I grab a hammer. I know the camera will bounce a bit, but and now when I look at this, the loop fits tight to the cone all the way around. And this is what the loop looks like. Now, we're not done with this loop yet. This loop is not straight. You see it's kind of cockeyed. And then if I look at this, I've got to move the loop that way. So I put it in the vise. And straighten it out. Now that loop is looking pretty round. And now all we need to do is make the tail loop and then the belly loop. So I've fit the stainless steel through wire into the lure. It takes a little bit of work on the tips. The wraparound is a little bit bigger, so you have to chew that out a little bit. And you fit it like that. And once the whole lure fits together tight, you're done. Now we haven't done the belly loop yet. The belly loop will look something like this. So what you do is you stick this in and you stick the through wire through there and you pinch it, and that way it's connected to the through wire. So this is what the belly loop looks like. It's a standard loop. Now because there's not a lot of distance between the center wire, the center through wire, you only make one complete loop for the wraparound. And then you measure where this bend should be. You can maybe see the green mark on there. So that clips on here, but you're not quite ready to do that because you've got to do two things. You've got to bring it back a little bit so the center line on the loop matches the center line of this hole here. And this is also a good time to round the lure with that tool. Okay, I've fitted this belly loop inside. This is what it looks like when I take the cover off. One of the things I did do though is I pinched the little flap to make sure it can't come out. And basically once I glue this thing, put wood glue all up and down here, it's good for pouring lead. So I thought doing the larger lure would be easier. I've used 2mm stainless steel. It's a good solid stainless steel. This lure is probably a little bit small for the 3/32 that I normally use, so the 2mm will do just fine. So I've finished putting in the through wire for the first small lure, and I'll take off the top here so you can see what it looks like inside. Looks pretty similar to the big one. I've had to use 1/16 inch stainless steel welding rods, and the reason that I have to do that is that 2mm wire that I used on the large hook, it just can't fit in here. So at some point in time you got to make a decision to go down in wire size. Now bear in mind, you're catching the same kind of fish that you might catch with a larger lure. Now you've got a smaller stainless steel. It's plenty strong, there's no doubt about that, but I have a sneaking suspicion these loops could, I wouldn't say easily, but they could bend, because Wahoos thrash around a fair bit. Now this clip will be completely immersed in lead. Lead makes a wonderful glue because once the lead gets around here, this clip is extremely strong. So anyway, this is some of the decisions you have to make when you're making lures. I like this clip, it's easy to do. I think it looks good, and so the next step for this lure and the previous large lure then is to glue them. And I have some nice little clamps. I've got some wood glue, and we'll get them all glued up, and after that we can pour some lead. Here are the two types of smaller lures, the 6 1/4 inch lures, and notice the top one, the hole in the belly is a whole lot smaller than the one down below. So the one up top is going to be a floater, and the one below is going to be a fast sinker, just based on the amount of lead. I can't get much more lead in that bottom one. Here's the larger lure. I've just glued the two pieces together with the wire inside, the through wire. And one thing you've got to be very careful about is lining up the two halves. Whatever you do, you make sure that the tail is lined up perfectly, square, and the entire two pieces fit together perfectly. So here are the stick baits. They've all had their stainless steel through wires put in and their belly loops, and they are now almost ready for having the lead put in. I have to make sure that there's no holes that the lead can get out, and then I'm going to pour the lead, and then I'm going to weigh each one and let you know how I did based on the weights that I was shooting for. Okay, so the lead pot has been heated up, and what I normally do is I'll skim any stuff off the top of the lead, and I'll also test where the lead comes out, because sometimes that gets, I think you can probably see that lead's coming out pretty good. So now, put on my safety equipment. I got my gloves on. So after we poured the lead, our first task is to seal up the holes in the lures. And to do that, I use a 5-minute epoxy. I like Gorilla epoxy, and the reason I like Gorilla epoxy is it hardens in 5 minutes, but it's not horribly hard. In 24 hours you can actually cut it with a razor knife. You can't sand it, but you can cut it. And then anywhere between 24 and 48 hours after that, it hardens enough to sand. And then in about 5 or 6 days, it gets extremely hard and tough. So what I'll do is I'll mix up this 2-part epoxy. I use a piece of my 1/16 stainless steel. There's always little pieces around, little scraps. And what I do is I will take a drip of epoxy and put it into the holes. Now I have to do one hole, let it harden, then I'll do the front, and I usually do the back last, but it doesn't really matter. So you drip it in there one drip at a time, and then as it drips down you put in a little bit more, and after about 3 of the 5 minutes it's starting to get pretty thick. Sometimes what happens is even though it says that the epoxy is 5-minute, sometimes after 5 minutes it can drain down a little bit. Now I've got an example of that to show you. This is very common. So this lure here, I put in quite a bit of epoxy and it went down, so I've got to put in more epoxy into this guy, and this one as well. I've got quite a bit of epoxy in here, and but I thought it was done. It looked like it was hard, and I walked away, came back, oh, it's down a 1/16 of an inch. So I've got to put some more in these two guys. That's very common. So after I've filled them with epoxy, I use a razor knife and I start to trim off the excess. And the razor knife is really nice because I can get in the back of the hooks, and I get it relatively flat. I actually come in from the side here, and I'll use a long blade and I'll trim and trim and trim, and because it's not hard yet, I have a pretty good chance of trimming it. If I was to wait 2 or 3 days, no way, I'd be sanding it all off. So then we've got that in pretty good shape. I take some sandpaper. This is the sandpaper I use. This is actually sandpaper from a belt sander, and the reason I do that is because it's got this thick backing on it. So I can get in here and start to sand, and it does a really nice job. I can get in here in the back and on the other side and over the top here. I don't do much on the tail because I like to build up the tail a little bit if I can, and then it hangs vertically and it just kind of smooths itself out, so you can actually get away without doing almost anything to the tail. So once I've got that ready, then what I do, I use a couple different products. So I use a product here. It's LePage's plastic wood, and I use that to fill in the lead holes that I had drilled. Some people on the internet, they use Bondo, but this stuff is so darn hard. I don't know why I would want to use Bondo. One negative thing about this filler is it's a little bit porous. So you sand it flat as best you can, and then if you were to apply a layer of paint, you would see little pinholes in it because it's a fairly rough filler. So another product I use, this is kind of a part 2, is I use the Elmer's wood filler. Now it comes in white and it comes in wood color. I like the white because I can tell where I've put it. It's easy to find, it's easy to sand. And this one is a water-based product, where the LePage's is a solvent-based. And this product is very buttery smooth. And what I do is I will put the Elmers on top of the LePages, and you can see here where I've sanded again, and this one here particularly, you can see just a little bit of white, and here there's a little bit more white. And if you do this, and after your coat of paint and a couple of coats of epoxy, these holes are absolutely invisible. So after that, after I put on the Elmers, it kind of looks like this. So I've done it, I fixed up the front a little bit, I fixed up the belly lure. One of these lures has I found a scratch on the side, so I'll fill that in. And then I use this 100 grit, this rather stiff paper, and I kind of do this to it. And you can get in there real close. And then of course you can also use the 250 grit when you're getting close to being done. And I spend a lot of time on my my loops because I like them to be really, really nice. So I'll spend some time. I'll use the razor knife here to get things off, especially in the front part of the loop where you have a hard time with the sandpaper. And I can take off the large amounts underneath the loop, but I can't make it look nice unless I have a number of really tiny files, and depending on the shape of the loop and the size of the lure, I can get in there and I can really make a nice job. So I spend quite a bit of time. I've spent probably good 3 hours getting them to where they are today.